Nicola Sturgeon accused of hypocrisy. Yesterday she was in an English abbey without a face mask. Today she told worshippers in Scotland they must keep wearing them. And the really tremendous but not so humble statement released by Donald Trump, his most famous former advisor, joins me to discuss whether the president really did score that hole-in-one. Alongside me throughout the show, US-UK commentator Sarah Elliott, who I don't think plays golf. But first, the headlines for you with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Your top stories this hour. A damning report into catastrophic errors at Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Hospital has found that 201 babies and 9 mothers may have survived if their care had been better. The independent inquiry examined more than 1,500 clinical instances between the year 2000 and 2019. Some babies had suffered skull fractures and were left with brain damage. The report also found several mothers were not allowed to have a caesarean section despite it being possibly a safer option. Head of the inquiry, Donna was highly critical of the trust, saying it hadn't learned from its own inadequate investigations.
We now know that this is a trust that failed to investigate, failed to learn, and failed to improve. This resulted in tragedies and life-changing incidents for so many of our families. The review team is particularly concerned by the lack of transparency internally within the trust, as well as the lack of honesty and transparency shown to families.
Donna Ockenden. Reverend Charlotte Cheshire's son suffered life-changing injuries after a traumatic birth.
My son will never live the life that he might otherwise have had, and the images that my late husband saw in intensive care that day literally haunted him with nightmares until the day he died in 2020. That is not the experience of becoming a parent that any parent should have, but that's what we live with.
Well, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, says the failures highlighted in the report have no place in the NHS.
To all the families that have suffered so greatly, I am sorry. The report clearly shows that you were failed by a service that was there to help you and your loved ones to bring life into this world. We will make the changes that the report says are needed at both a local and national level.
Sajid Javid. The Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, says he'll appeal a parole board decision to release the mother of baby P from prison. Tracy Connolly was jailed in 2009 for causing or allowing the death of her 17-month-old son Peter at her home in North London. He had suffered more than 50 injuries despite being on the at-risk register. The parole board cited Connolly's progress while in custody and time on licence as reasons for the decision. British ports will be given legal powers to refuse entry to ferry operators that don't pay the minimum wage. The Transport Secretary has laid out a package of measures in response to P&O Ferries' decision to sack 800 staff. Grant Shapps says his request to prevent entry to ferry services that don't pay fairly will be in force until the government makes it a legal requirement.
Where new laws are needed, we will create them. Where legal loopholes are cynically exploited, we will close them, and where employment rights are too weak, we will strengthen them.
Grant Shapps. The Prime Minister has faced MPs' questions on whether he knowingly misled Parliament over parties held in Downing Street during lockdown. That comes after the Metropolitan Police found coronavirus laws were broken during lockdown and issued 20 fixed penalty notices. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has accused Boris Johnson of lying about the parties and therefore breaking the ministerial code. The Prime Minister refused to answer a number of questions until the police investigation is complete.
And if it has been found that you did break the ministerial code, which, looking at all the things you've said and all the things that have transpired, it's almost pretty crystal clear that you did, that will mean a resignation issue for you.
With great respect, Pete, I think you're just going to have to hold your horses and wait until the conclusion of the investigation.
Boris Johnson. More than 50,000 spectators have paid tribute to the late cricketer Shane Warne at a state memorial service in Melbourne, in Australia. Performances given by Sir Elton John and Coldplay's Chris Martin, and tributes coming from his children, former teammates and fans. Considered one of the greatest leg spinners of all time, he died at the age of 52 from a suspected heart attack while on holiday in Thailand. You're with GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Right now, time to go back to Colin Brazier.
Hi, 6 minutes past 4, and we start with a really grim story. Make no apology for that this afternoon. The mother of baby P, who died after sustaining more than 50 injuries, including a snapped spine, has been declared fit to be freed by the parole board. This is the story of Tracy Connolly, jailed in 2009 after the death of her 17-month-old son, Peter, baby P. His injuries, which included 8 broken ribs, had been sustained over a period of months at home in Haringey, North London. The council had him on their at-risk register, and over the final 8 months of his miserable and short life, he received 60 visits from social workers, police officers and other health professionals. Connolly, who's 40, was imprisoned indefinitely for causing or allowing her son's death. Her lover, Stephen Barker, was jailed for a minimum of 32 years for torturing baby P to death. Today, the parole board found that Connolly doesn't pose a risk to the public, meaning she could be free within weeks. Let's turn then to Jerry Hayes, the former Tory MP and criminal barrister who joins us now. Jerry Hayes, welcome to you. What a vile and grim case this is. I'm sure as a criminal barrister, you've had to wade through cases like this more than you'd like to consider. Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary, has said there's a case to review what the conclusions the parole board has arrived at here. What do you make of it?
Well, don't forget, this is a very old law. It's imprisonment for public protection. And that was got rid of some time ago, but there are a number of people serving sentences. And it's interesting, she wasn't actually convicted of murder. She was convicted of allowing the child to be killed. Terrible offences. As you said, the child was tortured, broke its back, 50 injuries, absolutely appalling. So she was given minimum of 5 years. And what happens is, under the old law, the parole board have a look and see, is this person at risk? If they're no longer at risk, she is released. Now, she's had, I think, 4 goes over 17 years to be released, and they've come to a conclusion that she's no longer at risk. Now, we changed the law in 2019 to say, look, people can object to this. They really can. They can criticise, they can review the parole board's decision, but it has to be done via the Secretary of State. But it's quite a high hurdle he's got to jump. He's got to show that their decision was irrational and basically flies in the face of the evidence. So the chances of him succeeding are not very good. The next thing is, he has promised there's going to be a root and branch review of the parole board and the way it works, because they've made some pretty ghastly mistakes over the years of people who've been released who've been a danger to the public. I'm all in favour of that. But what I'm not in favour of is for ministers to be making decisions. And I think that's what he wants, ministerial oversight. And I'm afraid we'll just get knee-jerk reaction from politicians of all parties. And that's not good.
No, you know what, Jerry? I agree with you, and I agree with you for this reason. And people who remember this case will remember what I want to use the phrase cause célèbre, but in the worst way, it was a cause célèbre, wasn't it? Yeah. Because of the mishandling of the case by social services in particular, they got a lot of flack. You know, they really did. So it became a political case, Jerry, didn't it? It became a political case. And actually, at the end of the day, as you rightly point out, she wasn't the murderer. She created the circumstances where it could happen. Stephen Barker was the chief perpetrator, and he's got a long stretch.
Yes, absolutely right. I mean, she's just the remnant of an old, rather discredited law. But the really important thing is, the Secretary of State is right to have a review of the parole board, because people have got the right to feel that they are safe, that they're being protected, that people who are going to be at risk and put them at risk are going to be behind bars. But I think it would be irresponsible to say, well, we just throw away the key. We're not allowed to do that anyway. You do get whole life sentences, a good thing for the most serious cases, but it's only right that we have a look at this case again and see if she's going to be a risk. But if the parole board say, no, it's not irrational, we made the right decision, there's precious little that can be done about it.
Jerry Hayes, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Sarah Elliott alongside me to reflect on this case. There is a problem, I think, when cases assume a political significance, when somebody becomes for obvious reasons, a panto villain. Someone like Tracy Connolly in this instance, how could she let this happen? Well, the courts have a look at all the facts and they weigh proportionately what they should, as part of their deliberations. And they've decided that Stephen Barker goes to prison for 32 years, and she's done a long stretch too. It should be for people who understand the law to make the decisions, not politicians who may be playing to the gallery ever so slightly.
Yes, I mean, I agree. I mean, it really, especially a case that seems a bit nuanced here as well. However, you know, it does seem a tad unfair that a woman who watched the long abuse and murder of her son gets out to go free, you know, after only, well, I guess she's served about over 10 years now. She did have a small bit where she stepped out and then they had to pull her back in. And also, she's not really free in the traditional sense. She will have a tag on her. She will be monitored. It will not be, it's more kind of a halfway house situation. But still, you look at that sweet face and you wonder how anyone can walk free from letting someone like that die.
Well, we don't know what was happening in that home. Yeah. I hesitate to use the word home. Right. That poor child lived a very short life. But you know, we look at her circumstances. We look at it wasn't just her lover. I think his brother was involved as well. We know that there are things around coercive control. It sounds like I'm making excuses for this woman. I'm not. Yes. I'm simply, as you use the word nuanced. Yes. It may be more nuanced than the politicians sometimes recognise.
Exactly. And politicians love to make things black and white, good versus evil, and make themselves look like the good guy and take advantage of a situation like that. So I could see a politician doing something.
OK, Sarah, for now, thanks very much. Now, the House of Commons now has its first openly transgender MP. A statement appeared on the website of Jamie Wallace. It did so at 3 a.m. this morning, announcing that he had been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, that's the medical term to describe a sense of unease someone feels between the sex they were born into and the gender they feel they have. He's a 37-year-old Conservative member of Parliament for Bridgend in South Wales. In the statement, which appeared on his own website, the Welsh MP also confided that his life had been hit by a series of tumultuous events. He'd been involved in a past blackmail plot to extort £50,000 from him, as well as a rape case in which he'd been attacked by someone he met online, and a conviction against him for fleeing the scene of a car crash involving his Mercedes. Well, several Conservative MPs praised Mr Wallace, who hasn't yet announced what female name he plans to go by. The Prime Minister said Mr Wallace would get the love and support he needed. In his 3 a.m. statement, the Bridgend MP wrote, "I'm trans, or to be more accurate, I want to be. I've felt this way since I was a very young child." Well, this is what the PM had to say to Mr Wallace during PMQs.
Mr Speaker, the whole House will have read the statement today from my honourable friend, the member for Bridgend. And I know that the House stands with you and will give you the support that you need to live freely as yourself. Yeah.
Well, let's turn to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, to reflect on, an extraordinary is it confession, admission, announcement? Let's get the words right.
Well, I mean, certainly historic. I think Jamie put it himself, didn't he, saying that he knew it would be tough to try and keep this a secret, I suppose. He thought it would be possible. In the end, he decided it was impossible. Clearly, he's been through an awful lot in the last couple of years. And what we've seen today in the Commons is a reflection, I think, of the support from across the House, it must be said, not just Conservative MPs, but any opposition MPs to try, in a sense, to give him the support that maybe he feels he hasn't had, given what's happened to him, given what he's told us in the last couple of years. But he did say, he said that for a while it seemed as though I might be able to get on with things and to move on, that being an MP and hiding something like this was always going to be tough. But I arrogantly assumed I was up for it. Well, I'm not. And that in those circumstances, that's why he felt it was necessary to, as you say, in some ways to come out or to reveal or to announce today that he wants to live his life as a trans person. Historic in the sense that we've never had a trans MP before. And as I say, for many, they are celebrating this. Interestingly, George Osborne, the former Chancellor, today said that he feels that in many regards, it feels that politics is getting worse. But in some ways, it's getting better, he would argue, in that it is getting more inclusive.
Darren, for now, thanks very much. Russia is no longer demanding that Ukraine be denazified, a term widely seen as code for regime change. They also have hinted that they're prepared to let Kiev join the EU if it remains militarily non-aligned as part of ceasefire negotiations. People briefed on the peace discussions have said. Meanwhile, the governor of Ukraine's Chernihiv region says there is no let-up in attacks by Russia, despite a pledge to reduce military activity there. Let's turn to Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt, formerly of the US Navy. Admiral, thanks so much for your time. When we look at the situation around Mariupol, I think there were images yesterday suggesting that the Russian flag had been hoisted above the town hall there. In a sense, it doesn't matter if the Russian army make no inroads around Kiev or Chernihiv either, where they've said they're going to be withdrawing, if they're actually making their main effort, the south and the east of the country.
Hi, Colin. Thanks for having me. I think that's exactly right. And put it into context, when he took Crimea in 2014, he wasn't going to stop there. He had every intention 8 years ago to create the land bridge that we're really seeing him create today. So the goal of having that pass and that land bridge for Crimea was something he had been seeking since 2014. And I think he's going to achieve that militarily. And Kiev is really not his objective at this point, but this land bridge that you just described.
Yeah, it really, if he holds on to his gains, it really, I mean, it amounts to a partition. It amounts to turning what was a fairly maritime-facing nation with ports like Mariupol able to export wheat and all the rest of it. I mean, I know they've still got Odessa, but it's not making Ukraine landlocked, but it's making potentially in the future Ukraine a very different country on the map.
It is, and I think from a Russian perspective, it's given him that buffer to NATO that he desperately needs. I think, as you said, he's really recalibrated his objectives. Denazification, regime change. He is now looking at maybe settling on what his original objective was, which is this land bridge, this buffer with NATO, and assurances that Ukraine, even if it remains a nation state, will not be one that is considered a NATO nation.
Mike, what have you made of these reports, rumours suggesting that some of his senior henchmen, apparatchiks, are nowhere to be seen? Or if they have been seen, I'm thinking in particular of his defence minister, it's because he's been shuttling to and from a nuclear bunker in the Urals for fear of a nuclear strike, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting. And I think back to last week when NATO made such commitment to supporting Ukraine, I think they still fell short. And some of the things I would have liked to have seen them done was describe what a Ukrainian victory looks like. We talk a lot about resourcing Ukraine and Zelensky, but in reality, let's talk about what it means to resource a victory. And I think to your point on a lot of the leadership, we've already declared that what they're doing in Ukraine is a war crime. We should be aggressively going after every one of these Russian generals and these other leaders and designate them as war criminals. And that's how you really get at the heart of the leadership structure. And so I think the disappearance of some of these leaders or not being sure where the leadership structure is not surprising at all.
Well, maybe they know something that we don't at this stage. Mike Hewitt, appreciate your time. Thanks ever so much. Sarah Elliott's alongside me. I think we last talked a fortnight ago about Ukraine. Does it feel like much has moved since then?
Retracting. I mean, first off, Russia hasn't actually gained much in the last fortnight. And in fact, he's maneuvering and changing his goals and objectives. So I feel like the Ukrainians have achieved a great deal in the last month or so since the war started. I definitely didn't think sitting here that Zelensky would still be in Kiev and president. I thought militarily the Russians would roll in, and of course it would be a decade-long guerrilla warfare with the Ukrainians. But no, there's much to be happy about or optimistic about for the Ukrainians, but we need this conflict to end as quickly as possible. And make no mistake, I think Putin could push the button. I think he could. I think he's somebody who has no problem with chemical warfare, and he clearly has no conscience when attacking women, children, and those in need.
Sarah, Elliott for now. On that rather depressing note, thanks very much. Yeah. You are with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, repeated failures at an NHS trust may have led to the deaths of more than 200 babies. Our reporter will bring you the latest on that. So we've got the weather for you.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Hard to believe this time last week it was 20 degrees in the north of Scotland. Now we've got lying snow. Rain and snow is moving south across the country, turning things colder from the north. And there'll be further snow showers to come across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland into northern England during the rest of the day. But this is the feature of note. This is bringing Arctic air to the northern half of the UK during the rest of the day, and then that air sinks south overnight with rain initially turning perhaps to sleet and snow, with any snow mainly settling over hills, so the Chilterns, the North and South Downs for example, but could see some slight accumulations of slushy snow on grassy surfaces first thing in the southeast on Thursday. A cold start with icy patches for northern and eastern Scotland, northeast England as well. Further snow flurries coming in here during Thursday. Once we see the back of any rain, sleet and snow in the far southeast, it does brighten up, but there'll be further showers and there'll be a biting northeasterly wind across the country. That'll make it feel even colder than these temperatures would suggest. The wind at its strongest in the far southeast. Nevertheless, despite the cold feel, there will be some sunshine out there, the best of which will be towards the west. And if you're in the north, actually a decent chance of seeing the aurora on Thursday night. Excellent viewing conditions and a strong chance of that aurora happening. Widespread clear skies, a few more wintry showers into the east of England, northwest Scotland as well. But away from those, a widespread frost for the start of Friday, temperatures well below freezing in the countryside and where we've got any snow cover over the hills in the northern part of the UK. But plenty of sunshine first thing Friday, further showers into the east and the far northwest, but less windy, so perhaps not feeling quite as bitter. Into the weekend, things dry up a little and warm up.
Tonight on GB News, at 6 it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's been described as the worst maternity scandal in the history of the NHS. Today, a long-awaited report into harm caused to babies and mums at one hospital trust in the Midlands was released. An inquiry was initially set up in 2017 to look into the cases of 23 families, but that number grew to more than 1,800 families. The full extent of the problems at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital's NHS Trust is now really emerging. Our reporter Balvinder Sidhu has the details. Balvinder, over to you.
Good afternoon, Colin. Yes, that's right. This long-awaited review has taken 5 years in the making. It was set up in 2017 after 23 families came forward, and that number, as you mentioned, did grow. But subsequently, almost 1,600 cases of clinical incidents were investigated by senior midwife Donna Ockenden. And we can tell you today that the report found that more than 200 babies and 9 mothers would have survived had there been better care at the Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Trust. Babies were stillborn, they were born with severe brain damage, injuries, mothers were left with lifelong conditions as a consequence of poor treatment. Why did this happen? Well, there was a culture of not encouraging women to have a C-section or forcing them into natural labour, which meant as a consequence that there were problems when they were delivering babies. Families were not listened to. Now, these cases date back to 2000 and they span 2 decades. And in 2002, one mother I interviewed earlier told me that she was making noise then, but nobody listened. Incidents were not properly investigated, and had they been properly investigated, they would have learnt lessons and improvements would have been made, and that never happened. There's not enough staffing, there's not enough training, there were missed opportunities time and time again. Now, in between the period of 2011 and 2019, 40% of stillbirths and 43% of neonatal deaths were never investigated, and this just led to more and more cases. Instead of listening to families, mothers were blamed for the situation they were in. So today, Donna Ockenden, she said, I mean, this is probably the most damning report that's come out of a maternity service. She said the services, the board, the head of these hospitals failed to investigate, they failed to learn, and they failed to improve. Now, she has recommended that 60 changes be made immediately to the way the trust works, and she's also recommended that locally and nationally 15 targets are met immediately. She wants to see this as a watershed moment for maternity services across the country, not just here in Shrewsbury. In a statement, the Trust have said that, the Chief Executive of the Trust has said that the findings are deeply distressing. She apologises for the pain and distress caused, and they take full responsibility for their failings as a trust. Now, these families, this review would never have happened had it not been for the families who made noise initially. They are the ones that raised their voices, raised their concerns, and as a consequence, this review has been held. There is a criminal investigation also going on at the same time, which is very much active, and that started in 2017, and it involves 600 cases. Sajid Javid spoke in Parliament earlier as well, and he said that senior members who were working at the Trust at the time have been suspended or removed from their posts, and that they will be looking to make these changes immediately as soon as possible. An action plan will be developed to improve maternity services, not just here but across the country.
Balvinder, thanks very much indeed. Balvinder Sidhu there reporting on that dreadful ongoing story. Sarah Elliott's alongside me here. Sarah, do feel free to put in your two penneth about how mums feel when they go into maternity units and how much control over events at the level at which you can exercise any control over what's happening is available to you. But also reflect on this headline from The Telegraph by the columnist Alison Pearson, if you would. The maternity report that proves the NHS is not a national treasure, it's a national disgrace.
It's a strong headline, obviously sweeping, but I've had 2 children on the NHS. I'm American. I've been in the American healthcare system, and I think the number one weakness or fault I find with the NHS is it's not patient-centered. It's not focusing on you as an individual. It's focused on preserving the system. And you're kind of just along the treadmill, and everyone gets the same level of care and focus, which, of course, if you have limited resources, you have to give. But everyone is different. And you have to treat everyone as an individual. And up until that moment of birth, anything can happen. And midwives know that. And you've had 6 children.
Well, and my late wife had some in Belgium. And the difference...
Yeah.
I'm not holding, Belgium up as an example of much that's great in the world. But actually, you turned up, yes, with your credit card. But the level of scrutiny, of hand-holding, of scientific support was extraordinary compared to the level of maternity services that I saw when we came back to the UK, which was, frankly, lamentable.
I have had some, yes. I mean, I don't want to throw anything under the bus here, but
we pay for it.
We do.
Why shouldn't we be afraid to?
And I think it's kind of become the new religion not to criticize the NHS, because it does do wonderful things. My mother died of metastatic breast cancer, and I saw her at age 62 having to still work to keep health insurance so she could get treatment. So there are some pluses here that I see.
But we need to get beyond this mindset that says to criticise the NHS is somehow impugning the integrity of the clinicians and the doctors and nurses. You're not. It's entirely possible to criticise the NHS, the sacred cow, and be wholly supportive, bang some pots and pans, if you like, for the doctors and nurses, but you're not banging them for the NHS.
I actually think the system is holding back the talent of the NHS for them to actually use their mind and their critical thinking.
Sarah, we could talk some more about that. We might yet. Thanks very much indeed. Let's bring you the news headlines now with Polly.
I'm Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom with the very latest news headlines. A damning report into catastrophic errors at Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Hospital has found that 201 babies and 9 mothers may have survived if they'd received better care. The independent inquiry revealed repeated failures over a 20-year period. Some babies had suffered skull fractures and others were left severely brain damaged. The head of the inquiry said the Trust hadn't learned from its own investigations.
We now know that this is a trust that failed to investigate, failed to learn, and failed to improve. This resulted in tragedies and life-changing incidents for so many of our families.
Donna Ockenden speaking there. The Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says he'll appeal a parole board decision to release the mother of baby P from prison. Tracy Connolly was jailed in 2009 for causing or allowing the death of her 17-month-old son Peter at her home in London. He'd suffered more than 50 injuries despite being on the at-risk register. The Prime Minister's faced MPs' questions on whether he knowingly misled Parliament over parties held in Downing Street during lockdown. That comes after the Metropolitan Police found coronavirus laws were broken during lockdown and issued 20 fixed penalty notices. He refused to answer a number of questions until the police investigation concluded. British ports will be given legal powers to refuse entry to ferry operators which don't pay the minimum wage. The Transport Secretary has laid out a package of measures in response to P&O Ferries' decision to sack 800 staff. Grant Shapps says his request to prevent entry to ferry services that don't pay fairly will be in force until the government makes it a legal requirement. And Ukraine's President Zelensky has demanded the European Union close its ports to Russian vessels. That comes as the country's defence minister warned Russian forces are preparing to resume their offensive operations. President Zelensky said it's quite possible hundreds of children have been killed so far in the war and warned Russia's aggression doesn't appear to be slowing down. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Colin Brazier's back after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Automatic free parking for hospital workers in England is going to end on Friday. Parking fees were waived during the COVID pandemic at a cost to the taxpayer of £130 million. Parking, just to give you a sense of national context, it's free for NHS staff in Scotland and Wales, though not in Northern Ireland. In England, the GMB union branded the decision to reimpose those parking charges as a sick joke. Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, said that the vast majority of hospitals still gave NHS free parking if they were NHS staff free parking if they were working overnight. It's prompted our debate today. Is free NHS parking a perk or a necessity? Joining me now, Director of Communications at the IEA, Annabel Denham, and the former Labour MP for Ealing North, Stephen Pound. Welcome to you both, and thanks for your time. Stephen, I'm guessing your constituency will take in the big hospital. You certainly used to be there. I'm guessing it's still there at Ealing. Is that right? I mean, and actually, where I imagine the question is not so much what you pay as whether you can find a parking space.
Well, I'm a bit worried about your pessimism. Is it still there? We've got the West Mid, we got the North Mid, and we've got Northwick. But look, I come at it from a couple of perspectives, not just as one of the first children born on the NHS, but as someone who spent 22 years as an MP, acutely embarrassed by the fact that we had luxurious free parking spaces, over 350 free parking spaces underneath the House of Commons, some of which were used to store antique and high-priced vehicles, mentioning no names. But also someone who was a hospital porter, senior porter in the health service for years, over 10 years, and who had to allocate the parking spaces spaces. And at the Middlesex Hospital where I was, we had about 30 parking spaces, which were always taken up by consultants. But the problem I have is, on paper, it's a lovely idea, free parking for NHS staff. But there's about 1.5 million NHS staff in the UK, and about 160,000 of those are doctors, about 350,000 are nurses. So in other words, a third of NHS staff are doctors and nurses. The rest are people like myself, who used to be ancillary workers, technical workers, professions ancillary to medicine. So what happens to them? Do they get free parking as well? Because the reality is, in most of the central London hospitals, you couldn't park, you couldn't park a scooter there. So, and it also misses out one of the really crucial problems that used to worry the hell out of me when I was an MP. Yes, absolutely, worry about the stuff, but what about the visitors? Yep. What happens when your wife gets emergency treatment? Your husband comes in and he's in casualty. You can't park there. And it's crucial. Sometimes it's part of the therapy of a patient to actually have the relatives around them. So we are ignoring the situation of the visitors at our peril. And we are actually setting up a complete artificiality, whether it's a perk or whether it's a privilege or whether it's a necessity. I don't know. All I'm saying is, in most places in cities, it's an impossibility.
Yeah, no, you make so many good points there, Stephen. Annabelle, just in terms of the principle, or I suppose the tactics at play here, you can totally understand, can you not, why the NHS during the course of the COVID pandemic felt they had to offer something to NHS staff, and in a small way this was something. But it's a reminder actually of how difficult it can be for government to remove an expenditure once it's offered it. In this case, free parking. People get used to it, they like the idea. Oh no, you can't take it away.
Well, exactly. There's nothing so permanent as a temporary government programme. Yes, I think you're right, Colin. The first point to make here is that this probably was justified at the start of the pandemic. Our knowledge of the virus and how it behaved was pretty rudimentary, and to have those on the coalface avoiding public transport was probably a sensible policy, even if those individuals were not the frontline doctors and nurses. But as with so many measures and programs that were brought in during the pandemic, it's massively outstayed its welcome. Let's not forget that Freedom Day was 8 months ago now. So it's very, very difficult to justify just on those grounds. But there's also a lot to like just about the broader idea of reprieve on hospital parking. It's a subsidy to some staff, such as those who own a car, over others, those who are going to work by public transport, are not expecting to receive money from the NHS to pay their rail or bus fares. In all other areas of the government seems to view the private motor car as the enemy of the planet. So I'm not quite sure why this doesn't apply to vehicles owned by hospital staff, or at least it wouldn't going forward. My general view, I think, is that it should probably be up to the individual hospitals. But if they do choose to subsidise hospital parking, it probably begs the question as to whether their current funding levels are correct and whether resources are being deployed towards their best uses.
And actually, it's going to vary from hospital to hospital, Stephen Pound, according to the site, isn't it? I know the hospital near me, it's an old Victorian site. And how you'd shoehorn any extra parking spaces without demolishing quite a grand building and putting up some new multi-storey car park or underground parking, incredibly expensive to deliver, I don't know. But I absolutely agree with you when you make the point that we've got our priorities slightly wrong if we can allow tertiary staff to get a free parking space and somebody turning up with a terminally ill patient, perhaps a spouse or a child who needs vital chemotherapy or radiotherapy, and they're absolutely stressed, as you imagine, they turn up and they can't find a parking space.
Well, I did suggest, and it was a genuine suggestion, that during the bad times, during the pandemic, St Thomas's Hospital staff could use the House of Commons car park. Now, some of the more rigid authoritarian Tories who I used to rub shoulders with poo-pooed this idea on security grounds. And don't forget, we had one member of Parliament killed in the House of Commons car park in Gap. But it just seemed to me a fairly sensible idea. But then I asked myself, how come police don't get free parking? The ambulance staff don't get free parking, but even more worryingly, in my part of the world, community nurses and community midwives, who have by definition to visit people in their homes, Macmillan nurses who must visit people in their homes, they don't get free parking. Now, why on earth can't the government actually be a little bit smart for once in a while and move away from this sort of soundbite of free hospital parking, on a temporary basis? Because I have to say, what a marvellous statement. There's nothing so permanent as a temporary government measure. Yeah. Absolutely spot on. Why can't the government actually say there are some people who really need community nurses, community midwives, have to visit people at home. Very few people who staff certainly in the urban context have to travel by car. They don't have to. However, there are emergencies when you come in, and there are times when you're coming on shifts. Back in Parliament, when I first came in, and God, a long time ago, we used to sometimes go until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I'm not sure we did a great deal, but we were there. And then it was pretty important because the buses weren't running and there was no way to get home. And short of sleeping in your office, which opens you to all sorts of rather strange accusations, we had to drive in and out. I hated it, and I really loathed the idea of driving in. In fact, I came in by motorbike, and I thought it was the more sensible thing to do.
Annabelle Denham, we were having a conversation 10 minutes ago, Sarah Elliott and I here in the studio, about this dreadful report from Shrewsbury, the NHS Trust, their midwifery scandal, and reflecting on a piece today in the Telegraph by Alison Pearson, in which she says this is a reminder of how the NHS has become this religion that cannot be gainsaid or criticised. Is that part of the problem with the conversation we're having now? The idea of taking away free parking from doctors and nurses, we apply a different moral standard to them somehow.
Yes, I mean, I think that's right. But what I would say is that I'm increasingly hearing complaints from people working across all spheres about the cost of commuting. It's slightly as though the pandemic has adjusted our expectations perhaps to unrealistic levels. The idea that you can just get trains for free, or that you ought to be able to work from home because it costs money to get to work. Well, I'm afraid that's a fact of life. It costs money to run trains. They're not run by fairy dust. Of course, the fact that the NHS has reached this sort of status of national religion is a huge problem. It means that politicians are never willing to put their heads above the parapet and talk about reform. It means that privatisation has somehow become a dirty word, as though the only option is what we have in the UK and what we have in the US, when actually, if you look at some of the social insurance systems on the continent that have similar levels of spending as a percentage of GDP, that have universal healthcare for everybody, but that have much better outcomes, that is surely a model that we should at least be looking towards. But it's impossible to look at best practice and see what kind of measures we might be able to bring in here, because the fact that it's really reached this near religious status shuts down any dissent. It shuts down any possibility at discussion. And I do think, to Alison Pearson's article today in the Daily Telegraph, I don't agree with her on all things, but here she is absolutely right. And I say this as somebody who's expecting I'm having a baby on the NHS in about 2 months' time. I tell you what, Annabelle, I'm glad you weren't listening. Well, I hope you weren't listening to the conversation that Sarah Elliott and I just had about maternity experiences. You may have been discouraged. Annabelle, let me just go back for a final word from Stephen Pound. And I didn't plan to make this a conversation about NHS funding, but there is the small matter of £130 million that's going to be saved here. And I wonder if this isn't too much of a reach. Stephen, what you made of the spring statement, well, that actually predates the spring statement, doesn't it? But this idea now that any future increases in NHS spending because of this new health and social care levy, we'll know, because, the budget's grown like Topsy, hasn't it, over in recent decades. But at least now people will look at their pay slips and they'll see, oh, you want more money for the NHS, you want more money to pay for free parking for doctors and nurses. That's where it comes from.
Well, Barbara Castle, God love her, used to stand up at the Labour Party conference every year with a massive great blackboard, and she put it on. And every time we made a spending commitment, which was mostly, peace, love and happiness for absolutely everybody, and, a free parking space in Greenford, she'd actually write on the board what that cost, and then she'd tot it up and say, before we do any more spending commitments, what are we going to take away? Now, look, this business about the theology of the NHS is important. I'm one of 9 children. My 2 elder brothers were born in 1946 and 1947, and they both died at under a year. The rest of us, the 7 of us, I was born on the same day as the National Health Service. And I and my other brothers and sisters are, as you can see, still here in rude good health. So there is an element of theology here about this, a religious substitute. If cricket was the game that was invented to give the irreligious English some idea of eternity, then, the National Health Service replaces the religion in many places. But don't forget, in the time since I've been an MP, I was in 1997, there have only been 2 genuine independents ever elected. One was Martin Bell, Exceptional Circumstances, and the other was the Kidderminster Hospital Trust candidate. And in Ireland, there are 5 TDs elected purely on Save Our Hospital. But MPs looking over their shoulders can see this is a third rail issue. You touch it at your peril. And I think we need to actually widen the debate and be a bit objective about this. Yes, we love doctors. I've been married to one for 40 years and, we adore our doctors and nurses. But there are other people who use the NHS. Let's not forget the patients. Let's not forget the people who have to come and visit, as you rightly say, at that time of ultimate stress. And let's be a bit sensible and move away from sound bites. Free parking on the NHS. Well, I'm sorry. In the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, as I said, you couldn't park a cigarette paper there. Let alone your Prius. So let's be a bit objective and sensible about this. And may I say to Annabelle, I do wish you really well. You do marvellous. You're glowing with good health, and I'm quite sure you'll have a wonderful childbirth, and it'll be on the National Health Service. Good for you.
Stephen Pound, Annabelle Denham, we've run out of time, so you can't come back. But thanks both very much indeed. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, Nicola Sturgeon is to keep forcing some to wear masks in Scotland. We'll consider that one, but first the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Hard to believe this time last week it was 20 degrees in the north of Scotland. Now we've got lying snow. Rain and snow is moving south across the country, turning things colder from the north. And there'll be further snow showers to come across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland into Northern England during the rest of the day. But this is the feature of note. This is bringing Arctic air to the northern half of the UK during the rest of the day, and then that air sinks south overnight with rain initially turning perhaps to sleet and snow, with any snow mainly settling over hills, so the Chilterns, the North and South Downs, for example, but could see some slight accumulations of slushy snow on grassy surfaces first thing in the southeast on Thursday. A cold start with icy patches for northern and eastern Scotland, northeast England as well. Further snow flurries coming in here during Thursday. Once we see the back of any rain, sleet and snow in the far southeast, it does brighten up, but there'll be further showers and there'll be a biting northeasterly wind across the country. That'll make it feel even colder than these temperatures would suggest. The wind at its strongest in the far southeast. Nevertheless, despite the cold feel, there will be some sunshine out there, the best of which will be towards the west. And if you're in the north, actually a decent chance of seeing the aurora on Thursday night. Excellent viewing conditions and a strong chance of that aurora happening. Widespread clear skies, a few more wintry showers into the east of England, northwest Scotland as well. But away from those, a widespread frost for the start of Friday, temperatures well below freezing in the countryside and where we've got any snow cover over the hills in the northern part of the UK. But plenty of sunshine first thing Friday, further showers into the east and the far northwest, but less windy, so perhaps not feeling quite as bitter. Into the weekend, things dry up a little and warm up.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I've got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're On the Money.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yesterday, the SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon, appeared at Westminster Abbey without a face mask. In truth, most people there didn't have them on. Today, having returned to Scotland from England, she may have made that journey yesterday, but you know what I mean. And she's insisted that places of worship north of the border must still require congregations to wear COVID face masks or coverings. Not just places of worship, but weddings and funerals, at least until April the 4th. As for shops and public transport in Scotland, masks will be required to be worn by law until April the 18th at the earliest. This is the second time recently that Nicola Sturgeon has pushed back plans to lift COVID restrictions and has led again to a clamour of criticism from business leaders and opposition politicians who say Scotland is imposing draconian rules that do not apply elsewhere in the UK.
From next Monday, 4th April, it will no longer be a legal requirement to wear a face covering in places of worship or while attending a marriage ceremony, a civil partnership registration or a funeral service or commemorative event. And then the wider legal requirement applying to shops, certain other indoor settings and public transport will be converted to guidance 2 weeks later on the 18th of April. We will, of course, continue to encourage the wearing of face coverings in certain indoor places, especially where significant numbers of people are present. This phased approach strikes, I think, a sensible balance between our desire to remove this one remaining legal measure and the common sense need for continued caution.
James Bundy is Director of Operations for Freedom Declared Foundation. It's a religious liberty charity. James, thanks for your time. She says, Nicola Sturgeon says, COVID is more prevalent than other parts of the UK in Scotland, and therefore they need to take stricter measures.
Well, we already have the stricter measures in place, so they're obviously not working. So I think it's a little bit of a desperate claim from the First Minister that we need to keep these draconian measures, as have been described by politicians north of the border. The inconsistency in these rules is what really bothers me. So in Scotland just now, we can go to a pub or a nightclub or a football stadium, which are packed, and you don't need to wear a face covering, but a place of worship, which is sparse, well ventilated, you have to legally wear one. And there's absolutely no consistency. And she says that this is required because of public health. But yesterday, as have already been mentioned, at Westminster Abbey, she was not wearing a face covering. And whilst that's the rules in England, rules that we'll shortly be following in Scotland, if she really believed that a face covering would protect others, why wasn't she wearing one yesterday?
That's amazingly incoherent, isn't it, to have a policy that, as you say, privileges pubs over places of worship? Extraordinary.
Yes, but no, we've got like another flip. So as of next Monday, places of worship, you will not have to legally wear a face mask, but you'll have to wear one in a shop or in public transport. And freedom of religion or belief means that everyone should be treated equally regardless of faith or belief, rather than faith groups being prioritised. So those who have no faith are now starting to ask, can you not get COVID in a church, but you can get it in a shop? So there's absolutely no consistency, and this is just a desperate cling on to power by the First Minister. She should have just eased all of these restrictions at the same time and aligned us with the rest of the United Kingdom.
James Bundy, you're asking some very interesting questions, but it's just gone 5 o'clock, so there we have to leave it. Appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. It has gone 5 o'clock. So coming up live at 5, the mother of baby P could be released from prison in weeks. Does a woman who allowed her child to be tortured deserve to walk free? Also, we'll be discussing again what we were just discussing a moment ago. Nicola Sturgeon accused of hypocrisy. Yesterday she was in an English abbey without a mask. Today she told worshippers in Scotland they must keep wearing them. And the not-so-humble statement released by Donald Trump, his most famous former advisor, joins me to discuss whether the president really did score a hole-in-one alongside me throughout the show. US-UK commentator Sarah Elliott. But first, the headlines with Polly.
The latest headlines this hour: a damning report into catastrophic errors at Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Hospital has found that 201 babies and 9 mothers may have survived if they had received better care. The independent inquiry looked at more than 1,500 clinical instances and revealed repeated failures over a 20-year period. A number of babies suffered skull fractures and were left brain damaged. Several mothers were made to have natural births, despite the fact there were often good clinical reasons that they should have had caesarean sections. The head of the inquiry, Donna, said the Trust hadn't learned from its own investigations.
We now know that this is a trust that failed to investigate, failed to learn, and failed to improve. This resulted in tragedies and life-changing incidents for so many of our families.
Sonia Lee's daughter, Catherine, died in 2000, shortly after her birth. She said she's waited too long now for an apology.
All I ever wanted was somebody to say, I am sorry, I made the mistake, and I will retrain and I will learn from my mistakes, and I never want this to happen again. That's all I ever wanted. Mistakes happen, we're human, but they have to learn from those mistakes.
Sonia Lee speaking. Well, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, said the failures highlighted in the report have no place in the NHS.
To all the families that have suffered so greatly, I am sorry. The report clearly shows that you were failed by a service that was there to help you and your loved ones to bring life into this world. We will make the changes that the report says are needed at both a local and national level.
Sajid Javid. Well, also in the news today, the Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, says he'll appeal a parole board decision to release the mother of baby P from prison. Tracy Connolly was jailed in 2009 for causing or allowing the death of her 17-month-old son, Peter, at her home in London. He'd suffered more than 50 injuries despite being on the at-risk register. The parole board cited Connolly's progress while in custody and time on licence as reasons for their decision. British ports will be given legal powers to refuse entry to ferry operators which don't pay the minimum wage. The Transport Secretary has laid out a package of measures in response to P&O Ferries' decision to sack 800 staff. Grant Shapps says his request to prevent entry to ferry services that don't pay fairly will be in force until the government makes it a legal requirement.
Where new laws are needed, we will create them. Where legal loopholes are cynically exploited, we will close them. And where employment rights are too weak, we will strengthen them.
Grant Shapps. The Prime Minister has faced MPs' questions on whether he knowingly misled Parliament over parties held in Downing Street during lockdown. And that comes after the Met Police found coronavirus laws were broken during lockdown and issued 20 fixed penalty notices. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has accused Boris Johnson of lying about the parties and therefore breaking the ministerial code. The Prime Minister refused to answer a number of questions until the police investigation is complete.
And if it has been found that you did break the ministerial code, which, looking at all the things you've said and all the things that have transpired, it's almost pretty crystal clear that you did, that will mean a resignation issue for you?
With great respect, Pete, I think you're just going to have to hold your horses and wait until the conclusion of the investigation.
Maurice Johnson. The most distant star ever seen from Earth has been spotted by astronomers. The discovery, made by Durham University using a NASA telescope, has found the light from a star which has taken 12.9 billion years to reach Earth, beating the last farthest star observed at 9 billion light-years away. Scientists say it could be the earliest star ever seen since the Big Bang, unlocking secrets of previously unknown parts of the universe. You're with GB News, more news as it happens. Now back to Brazier.
Well, the mother of baby P, who died after sustaining more than 50 injuries, including a snapped spine, has been declared fit to be freed by the parole board. This is Tracy Connolly, jailed in 2009 after the death of her 17-month-old son, Peter, hence baby P. His injuries, which included 8 broken ribs, had been sustained over a period of months. At home in Tottenham in North London, the council had him on their at-risk register, and over the final 8 months of his short life, he received 60 separate visits from social workers, as well as police officers and other health professionals. Connolly, who's 40, was imprisoned indefinitely for causing or allowing her son's death. Her lover, Stephen Barker, was jailed for a minimum of 32 years for torturing baby P to death. Today, the parole board found that Connolly does not pose a risk to the public, meaning she could potentially at least be freed within weeks. Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary, in the last couple of hours or thereabouts, has said he plans to ask the parole board to reconsider that recommendation. Let's turn to Donna Jones, the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire, who joins us now. Donna Jones, welcome to you. What did you make of this decision at first blush?
I couldn't believe it. I mean, poor little Peter's face is one that I think will live with most of us for the rest of our lives. Seeing, you know, his bright blue eyes and his little face looking up, and you know, it's one of those cases that was so shocking at the time that it broke the nation's hearts, and it's still with us. And what those 2 individuals did, what she did as a mother, to allow 2 men, and particularly the partner you've just mentioned, to commit such horrific injuries to a defenceless and helpless child, a child whose spine was snapped when he was found dead. It really is an utter disgrace, and it's why we do need a review of the sentencing for criminals, for people who hurt children and who kill children.
What would be, Donna, an appropriate sentence for this woman? I mean, would you throw away the key?
Yes, I would, for both of them. Life for me, for someone who kills children, life should mean life. If you take a life of an innocent child, you should be spending the rest of your life behind bars and never walking free again. And whilst I do support the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, when it comes to some of the most depraved crimes in our societies, of which this is one, that child had done absolutely nothing to anybody other than just try and live and survive. There were multiple failings in this case, but what concerns me most is that there are 2 competing demands here. One is punishment, the punitive element of sending somebody to prison for what they've done wrong in killing another human being or allowing a child to be killed in this way. And secondly, the protection of the public. And as you said at the very beginning, this woman was given an indefinite sentence, an IPP, an imprisonment for public protection order as well. And that was done because she was deemed to be such high risk to the people of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And yet, here we are, 13 years later, 4 parole boards later, where they are now looking at releasing her, not the first time, but in fact the second time. She was released once previously and was recalled for breaking licence conditions. And I've been looking at the parole board's recommendations, 20 licence conditions to keep her away from committing any further crimes and protecting the public. If you need to put that many licence conditions in place to prevent somebody from committing harm to children or anyone else in society, I would argue that they should still be behind bars, because actually they do still pose a significant risk to the public. And I really welcome the Lord Chancellor's decision today to appeal the Parole Board's decision.
There's a lot to agree with there. Let me just play devil's advocate, if I may. You quite rightly say this was a hugely high-profile case. It tugged at the heartstrings of the entire nation. We see the picture. We remember the picture. One of the reasons, maybe the chief reason it became such a cause celeb, was because of those 60 visits I mentioned at the beginning. This was a home where, when the police arrived, when the crime had been committed, it was hard to determine where the dog feces started and the human feces began. It was hideous, disgusting conditions. Social services didn't spot the danger signs. And I'm one of those people, by the way, who doesn't think we should always blame social services. This was done by a perpetrator, which brings me on to the next point. The perpetrator is doing a long stretch, 32 years. He delivered the fatal blows. She allowed it to happen. There has to be a difference in, coming back to my question about what you think is a fair stretch, there has to be a difference between what he gets as the individual who tortured this child to death and what she got, this woman who's the daughter of a drug addict, a sad, pathetic individual, but who didn't actually land the fatal blows.
Well, even if, let's just take the point that you've said there at its highest. Let's agree with the point that you've made there, that there should be a difference between them. And I think in terms of culpability, as the mother, as the person that has the parental guardianship, the legal responsibility for that child, I would argue her culpability is incredibly high. I've got 2 children. I'm a mother. I can't even comprehend. You can't, rationalise irrational behaviour. So I'm not going to even try and do that. However, do we think that 13 years is sufficient for somebody like her who allowed that to happen to that poor child? No, I don't think that's a long enough sentence.
Donna Jones, thanks very much indeed for your thoughts today. Really appreciate it. Sarah Elliott's alongside me. As a mum, your thoughts?
Well, I agree with her, and I think because you're the guardian of that child who's helpless and relies on you for everything, then you are culpable as well. And I think the key should be thrown away pretty much. It's really funny how she will leave, or her parole sentence will be at home, but she will be tagged, she will be followed, certain websites will be limited. And this reminds me of the terrorist that was let go, but had to be followed by cops. And then his first act in Streatham was to actually find a knife and go and kill someone. If you have to put all these restrictions on an individual, it seems like they shouldn't be let out to begin with.
Sarah, for now, thanks very much. The House of Commons now has its first openly transgender MP. A statement appeared on the website of Jamie Wallace at 3 a.m. this morning, announcing that he'd been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, that the medical term to describe a sense of unease someone feels between the sex they were born into and the gender they feel they are. He's 37, Conservative Member of Parliament for Bridgend in South Wales. In the statement, which appeared on his own website, the Welsh MP also confided that his life had been hit by a series of tumultuous events. He'd been involved in a past blackmail plot to extort £50,000 from him, a recent rape case in which he'd been attacked by someone he met online. He goes into great detail about that in his statement. And a conviction against him for fleeing the scene of a car crash involving his Mercedes. Several Conservative MPs praised Mr Wallace, who hasn't yet announced what female name he wants to go by. The Prime Minister said Mr Wallace would get the love and support he needed. In his 3 a.m. statement, the Bridgend MP wrote, "I'm trans, or to be more accurate, I want to be. I felt this way since I was a very young child." Well, this is what the Prime Minister had to say to Mr Wallace during PMQs. He approved, in short. Let's turn to the Tory member of the London Assembly, Andrew Boff. Andrew Boff, welcome to you. What did you make of this statement?
I wanted to rejoice, to be honest, that Jamie had will finally be able to live their true selves, and he must have been through a terrible time, and I just hope that this will give them comfort. I really do.
Andrew, what do you say to those crueler voices online who are saying this is somebody's been elected to represent tens of thousands of people, and their private life is, for whatever the reason, it's a bit of a mess?
Well, that's the experience of a lot of trans people. The violence that Jamie saw, the attempts of blackmail, the intimidation, the harassment, are the experiences of many trans people in a world which is not very accepting of them. So actually, Jamie brings to the House of Commons an experience that wouldn't have been there otherwise.
What have you made of the reception he's received in the House?
Well, they've had an enormously positive reception. I texted Jamie earlier myself to say, you've got friends and support and people will help you out. The party has been fantastic. And I think often the Conservative Party is caricatured as in some way as being anti-trans people. Well, we are not. We have debates within the Conservative Party about the best way in which trans people can achieve their rights, receive healthcare. But there is nothing intrinsically against trans people in the Conservative Party. And I hope our embrace of more trans people carries on, and we see a greater membership of the party from trans Brits.
And Andrew, look, we spent a lot of time on this news channel, I certainly have done over the last year, having robust discussions about really sensitive questions. I had one yesterday about a cyclist who, I think by the consensus is that he will enjoy a strong advantage, a strong physical advantage over his female competitors. Now he has transitioned from man to woman. It's important to be able to have those conversations without people screaming turf at you, isn't it?
Yeah. And each of those sporting bodies have their own governing council, which determine the categories of people that people can play in according to certain medical criteria. That debate carries on. And by all means, we should carry on having a debate about the best way in which trans people, the best support that we can give to trans people in order to live openly in our communities. They've been neglected so much in the past. I feel particularly bad for young trans people who are being told that they have to have their any kind of medical intervention that will help them just declined as a matter of policy. Luckily, that's been overturned. And we can now, the parents and the guardians of young trans people, can do what's best for them with professional help.
Andrew Boff, there's several other questions you raised there, which we might get time to discuss some other time, but not now, I'm afraid. Andrew Boff, thanks.
It's an argument that will go on and on, I am absolutely assured.
OK, Andrew Boff, thanks a lot. Now, the trial has started in Virginia of a British man who belonged to an ISIS terror cell who tortured and beheaded Western hostages. 33-year-old El Shafi El Sheikh from West London will not face the death penalty for his alleged involvement in the murder of at least 27 British, American and foreign hostages. That's because British involvement in the trial was only on condition that El Sheikh wouldn't go to the electric chair. Present at the trial will be a young Scotswoman whose father, the aid worker David Haynes, was tortured and beheaded by El Sheikh or one of his associates as part of a group nicknamed the Beatles on account of their English accents. Bethany Haynes hopes to discover where her father's body was buried. Well, joining me now is Rakib Hassan from the Henry Jackson Society. Rakib, welcome to you. This was, well, it's going to be one of those trials which will rekindle bitter memories for many, I think.
Oh no, it definitely will, Colin. I would say this is one of the biggest terrorism-related cases for some time. Al Shafi El Sheikh is arguably the most senior ISIS figure to ever face the US justice system, and as you've said, he was part of the ISIS Beatles group, which included Mohammed Mwazi, otherwise known as Jihadi John. He's facing charges of hostage taking and conspiracy to murder for 4 murdered Americans and also 2 murdered British humanitarian workers, as you say, David Haines and Alan Henning. And I do think the case will expose the inner organisational workings of ISIS, and as I've said, it is the largest, biggest, most significant terrorism-related case for a very long time.
Rakib, there was a time 15, 17 years ago when we switched on our TV sets and the danger of beheadings, Western hostages, it was everywhere, it was all-consuming, it was absorbing the time of our leading politicians and front pages of newspapers. And I just wonder, as somebody who's made a close study of Islamism and Islamists, whether there became a recognition within those hideous circles that actually it was counterproductive, that the idea of filming somebody being executed by having their head chopped off was ultimately counterproductive.
Well, I think that what we have to be aware of in the UK is that there is that threat of non-violent Islamist extremism. And I do feel we have Islamist extremists who are quite savvy in how they go about their business. They recognise that those barbaric practices are counterproductive. You can almost say that Islamists, they have their own PR exercises, PR operations, but what they're looking to do instead is infiltrate and ultimately gain control and change the rules of governance within public institutions in the UK. So you are definitely right that there is a shift in terms of how Islam extremists, how they go about their business, but that also means that Britain as a country has to be aware of the threat of non-violent Islamist extremism.
Yeah, that's a good point. Rakib Hassan, we've got to leave it there. We're running low on time today, but thanks as ever for your time. Thanks a lot. Let's turn to Sarah Elliott, US-UK commentator, who actually, I've been listening to that story, but you want to say something, I think, about the Tory MP story who's come out as the first transgender MP. What do you make of that one?
Well, I think it's he's been through a lot, clearly, and I think it was very brave of him to write that statement and put himself out there in a very vulnerable way. I have to say, I think that it's nice to see everyone embrace him as a human being and someone who's different and obviously going through some difficulty. But, I think the issue around trans for everybody right now, particularly for women, is how do you view the trans and women? Are we anti each other, or can you make room for women, that we are still, 51% of the population, and do we have to have our sports and athletics dominated by biological men who identify as women? And I think that's where the debate with trans is right now. It's not that I think all sides want to see dignity and respect for people as an individual and have their, civil rights respected. But at the same time, what about the rights of women? And so that's where I'm curious to hear the MP speak out on.
OK, Sarah, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, reports that Prince Charles and Prince William objected to the Queen arriving in a car with Prince Andrew to Prince Philip's memorial yesterday. We'll talk to Dickie Arbiter about that. But first, and the weather does matter because it's really cold in parts of the north today in Scotland. Here's the weather forecast.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGiven from the Met Office. Rain and snow is currently clearing south across the UK, followed by cold Arctic winds and the risk of icy patches first thing Thursday. This cold front is bringing a marked change, with Arctic air following south and in some places temperatures dropping more than 10 Celsius compared with a few days ago. It's also bringing a mixture of rain and hill snow, with the snow increasingly coming to lower levels across southeast England as it clears during the early hours of Thursday. Don't be surprised in the southeast, particularly if you're somewhere like the Chilterns or the Downs, to wake up to a slushy covering of snow. Won't last long though, and in the north we've already seen some snow and it will continue through the night with some icy patches first thing. A widespread frost to begin the day, temperatures well below freezing for some clearer and more sheltered parts of northern UK, and actually plenty of bright weather first thing once any remaining persistent rain and snow clears away from the far southeast. There'll be further wintry showers, sleet, snow, hail into the east of England, northern and eastern Scotland on a biting northeasterly wind, and it's going to feel cold in that wind. Temperatures at best 6 to 8 Celsius fairly widely. But there'll also be sunny spells away from the showers, particularly in the west. And a heads up, With clearing skies on Thursday evening, a really good chance actually of seeing the aurora, especially if you live in the north. But it's going to be a freezing night under those clear skies. Still some wintry showers into the east first thing Friday. Further showers into the northwest as well. But away from those showers, sunshine and temperatures at or below freezing. Soon enough, though, it will warm up through Friday morning into the afternoon, temperatures reaching 8 to 9 Celsius quite widely. There'll be further showers, but not quite as many as Thursday, and it won't be quite as windy. Saturday brings with it further showers, drier for many on Sunday and a little warmer.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
£5:27. The Daily Mail is reporting today that Prince Andrew strong-armed the Queen into letting him take centre stage alongside her at yesterday's memorial service for Prince Philip. The paper claims that Prince Charles and Prince William were strongly against a prominent role for the disgraced Duke of York, who recently reached an out-of-court settlement with Virginia Giuffre over those sex crime allegations. The Mail said that the Dean of Westminster had been originally expected to take the Queen to her seat, but to the surprise of many and the dismay of some, Prince Andrew was pictured leading the sovereign to her place in the Abbey. Well, joining me now, former Buckingham Palace advisor, Dickie Arbiter. Dickie, welcome to you. These are allegations in the Mail. I can't vouch for them. I can't imagine you can either. But do they ring true?
No, they don't. The Mail quotes sources. I think for sources, read speculation. It just fills out pages, it fills out their agenda, and quite frankly, at the end of the day, Andrew lives just down the road from his mother in Windsor Great Park. It made sense that he accompanied her to the Thanksgiving service. She was there because it was her husband, and Andrew was there because it was his dad. The rest of the family didn't acknowledge him. He saw the Queen to the centre of the aisle. She turned right, went to her seat alone, and he turned and sat down next to Prince Edward. None of the family acknowledged him, and I think, quite frankly, we've got to move on. I mean, the guy was there because it was his dad's Thanksgiving service, and the fact that he accompanied his mother, it kind of makes sense because the Queen is frail. Anything could have happened. And
Dickie, anybody could have accompanied her. But I think people will probably say anybody could have accompanied her. And, the Queen's a shrewd political operator. And it felt more than happenstance. It felt like she was using up some of her capital to say, here is my son, he's literally standing by me and I am metaphorically standing by him.
As you would expect a mother to do. Andrew has paid the price. All sorts of figures are being bandied about. I think the last one I saw was £7 million being paid to Virginia Giuffre. But he is Queen Elizabeth's son. And yes, any mother would stand by their son. But I think too much capital is being made out of what was a terrific service, a terrific send-off, something that should have happened last year but didn't. The eulogy by David Connor, the Dean of St George's Chapel, was excellent. And the Queen was terrific. She bobbed up and down when required. She took note of the eulogy, put her glasses down when the service was over and left.
Dickie, I say this in good faith. I say it as a resolute monarchist myself. But, you know, yes, you're saying the Queen was there as a mother. She's also our head of state. And as our head of state, she will know, and her advisors will have told her, that the Duke of York's... The misgivings people have about the Duke of York are not going to disappear overnight. I would submit they will never disappear. And as such, he needs to go to ground and stay there. Because any public appearance by Prince Andrew is damaging to the institution which the Queen has given a life of public service to.
Queen has given a life of public service to. The Queen was there. It was a family service. Yes, there were a lot of other people there, but at the end of the day, it was a family service, something that should have taken place last year, but didn't because of COVID. She is standing by her son, but she was there as the widow of Prince Philip, not as head of state, and we've got to remember that.
I get all that. It was a family. Dickie, it was a family service, broadcast live by the state broadcaster. You know, you go to family services, I go to family services. Sarah Elliott, who's alongside in the studio, goes to family services. There are not teams of camera crews broadcasting to the nation and abroad what's happening there. It's that oldest division, you know far better than I do or anybody else, that this oldest division in monarchy, that yes, it's a family, and we love the fact that as a family we can project onto them all the ups and downs of family life, but they also have this enormously important constitutional role. And it wasn't just a private service. The cameras were let in yesterday. It was being beamed around the world.
It wasn't a private service. I never said that. What I did say, it was a family service, and the world was there watching. The world was there making up its own mind. Newspapers went, as one commentator on the particular newspaper you were quoting, the Daily Mail, said it was OTT. If you read the Times, it was a completely different story. Yes, they mentioned Andrew. They questioned whether he should have been there, but it wasn't as vicious as the Mail story was. The Sun relegated it to page 3. And I think at the end of the day, yes, Andrew has done wrong. He has paid the price. He has gone to ground. He's lost all his titles, his military associations. He's lost all his charities. He's not allowed to use HRH. He will go to ground. And I doubt we'll see him again unless the inevitable happens, which it will one day.
Dickie Arbiter, appreciate your time and your frankness. Thanks very much indeed. Sarah Elliott's alongside me. Dickie says Prince Andrew has paid the price, and as he enumerates all the things that he's had to surrender, you are reminded that actually, given that this was never contested in court, I'm just devil's advocate, you know, Prince Andrew has given up a lot.
He has given up a lot, and I firmly think that when Prince Charles comes into power, we will not be seeing Prince Andrew anywhere. The one thing with the royals is they never do anything by accident. I think the Queen very purposefully did that out of love for her son, but that will be probably one of the last acts of royal duties Prince Andrew will do publicly.
OK. Sarah, thanks very much indeed. Gosh, we've had a really heavy show. We're going to try and lighten it up with Guess Who? Donald Trump's hole-in-one. He said, many people are asking, so I'll give it to you now. It's 100% true. These are the words from his statement. We'll explain what was true or what wasn't true shortly. We'll do that in the company of Sebastian Gorka, formerly an advisor to President Trump. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The top story is a damning report into catastrophic errors at the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital has found that 201 babies and 9 mothers could have survived if they'd received better care. The independent inquiry revealed repeated failures over a 20-year period. Some babies suffered skull fractures and were left brain damaged. The head of the inquiry, Donna, said the trust hadn't learned from its own investigations. The Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says he'll appeal a parole board decision to release the mother of baby P from prison. Tracy Connolly was jailed in 2009 for causing or allowing the death of her 17-month-old son Peter at her home in London. He'd suffered more than 50 injuries despite being on the at-risk register. Ukraine's President Zelensky has demanded the European Union close its ports to Russian vessels. That comes as the country's defence ministry is warning Russian forces are preparing to resume offensive operations. President Zelensky has said it's quite possible hundreds of children have been killed during the conflict, and he warned Russia's aggression isn't slowing down. And the Prime Minister has faced MPs' questions on whether he knowingly misled Parliament over parties held in Downing Street during lockdown. It's after a Met Police investigation found coronavirus laws were broken during lockdown and issued 20 fixed penalty notices. Boris Johnson refused to answer questions until police had concluded their investigation. British ports will be given legal powers to refuse entry to ferry operators who don't pay minimum wage. The Transport Secretary has laid out a package of measures in response to P&O Ferries' decision to sack 800 staff. Grant Shapps says his request to prevent entry to ferry services that don't pay fairly will be in force until the government makes it a legal requirement. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. More from Colin Brazier after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, he's still banned from Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, so Donald Trump had to use his own website to issue a statement this week. And if you've missed some of the verbal tics and cadences of speech that, if nothing else, gave the president's pronouncements their distinctive character, then I hope you'll enjoy this item. Mr. Trump's subject, answering skeptics who'd apparently doubted a story that he'd hit a hole-in-one. He was playing on one of his own golf courses in a group that included the former pro, Ernie Els. And in a statement he wrote, this isn't the full thing, I do recommend you go and try and find it, but here's part of it. Many people are asking, I'm not going to do the accent, many people are asking, so I'll give it to you now. It is 100% true. It took place at Trump International Golf Club in West Palm Beach, Florida, on the 7th hole, which was playing 181 yards into a slight wind. I hit a 5-iron, which sailed magnificently, his word, into a rather strong wind with approximately 5 feet of cut, whereupon it bounced twice and then went clank into the hole. These great tour players noticed it before I did because their eyes are slightly better. But on that one hole only, their swings weren't. Anyway, he goes on, there's a lot of chatter about it, quite exciting, and people everywhere seem to be asking for the facts. I won't tell you who won because I'm a very modest individual, and you'll say that I was bragging. I don't like people who brag. Well, joining me, the host of America First, the national radio show, and former Trump advisor, Dr. Seb Gorka. Did you ever play golf with the president, Seb?
I tend to agree with, who was it, Oscar Wilde or Mark Twain, who said golf is a good walk ruined. But I have
Winston Churchill, I think.
Winston Churchill, I'll take it from you, Colin. But I have spoken to several people who have, and they have all confirmed for me that this man may not only own some of the best golf courses in the world, he is a mean golfer. He's a very, very good golfer, and he demonstrated it again yesterday. And it's a nice reminder, isn't it? So, you know, for the 4 years that President Trump was president, politics was finally fun again. And now he's doing that, whether it's his statements about the hole-in-one or whether it's the new social media platform he launched just, what was it, over a month ago, Truth Social. So you can't keep a good man down, and I guarantee you he'll be back in politics very, very soon.
Well, that's a story for another time, and it's what we've talked about before. But I just want to, he's such a distinctive voice, even on paper. There aren't many politicians. You could transcribe their words, or you can speak their words as they're written, and you hear a phrase, you hear the cadences, the rhythms of the way they speak. It's all his own, instantly recognisable.
Yes, and all of the GB News watchers were waiting for you to do the impersonation, Colin. So next time we want to hear you do it in his voice, but you're absolutely right. I was often asked when I was in the White House, who writes his tweets at 4 a.m.? And I'm saying, yeah, seriously? Have you read them? He's writing them. He slept 2.5 hours a day, and he would be posting them at 4 a.m., not me or anybody else.
I've gone for the orange makeup, Seb. I'm afraid I do. I do. So in that regard, imitation and flattery. It's something, though, isn't it? And bears reminding people that, you know, this was on his own website, not Facebook, not Instagram, not Twitter. He still can't use those websites. Extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. And think about this, Colin, that two people who don't really like my former boss, the former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, and Macron of France, both went on the record after he was unpersoned in an Orwellian sense and said, it is plain wrong. A man who was elected president with more than 90 million followers on one platform alone, on Twitter, to be deleted because Palo Alto and Silicon Valley don't like his politics, that is plain wrong. And when your political rivals say that, I think there's something to it.
I'm just going to repeat that final paragraph, Seb, from his statement. I won't tell you who won because I'm a very modest individual. And you will then say I was bragging, and I don't like people who brag. And I read that quote in quotes in a newspaper. I won't name the newspaper, and they said he said it without any irony. And I read that and thought, did he say it ironically or didn't he? I don't like people who brag. I'm a very modest individual. You know him. Is that irony? Is that a lack of self-knowledge? I think it's the former. I hope it is.
It's the epitome of irony. I mean, this is a man whose ego, you know, has propelled him to be one of the most successful businessmen in the world and to the highest office in the land. So that was written with his tongue firmly placed in his cheek.
Seb, really good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Seb Gorka there. Sarah Elliott alongside me. Definitely ironic.
Definitely. He has a great sense of humor. But what I want to know is it harder to get a hole-in-one or to become the U.S. president?
Well, there's plenty of golfers who've done it on a short hole. But you take my point, don't you, that, I mean, I find myself, I'd rather missed. I mean, you know, whatever else his many shortcomings, Donald Trump, many of us found him quite funny, sometimes, you know, inadvertently. And actually, that's the way he speaks with those little punctuation, you know, comma, tremendously exciting, you know, I sort of missed it a little bit.
Well, and I think actually you're so right that when he types it, you hear it in, or when you read it, you hear it in your head. And I think that's one reason why his arch nemesis wanted him off Twitter, because they could hear his voice, they could hear his whole persona, who they disliked greatly.
We're just going to change tack completely to a serious story, and I know one that Sarah Elliott's got a strong view on, and it's some breaking news. MPs have today voted in the biggest change to abortion legislation since 1967. This is an amendment to the Health and Care Bill. It's made DIY home abortion available permanently, and has overturned the government's decision last month to end the scheme. Home abortions were initially temporarily permitted during the pandemic, one of those things that was suspended or allowed to happen during the pandemic. Sarah Elliott, I know you're involved in campaigns on this or thinking hard about this. What do you make of this vote?
Well, I mean, it's quite significant. And, you know, let's really talk about what this means. I think this should be, you know, in section 1 of the newspapers, if not on the front page, because this has to deal with millions of women or hundreds of thousands of women throughout the country who can then terminate their pregnancy or terminate a life in the first 24 weeks of pregnancy. And this is at home by themselves, unassisted, unmonitored. There are not doctors, there are not nurses to care for you. You are forced and go into labor. You know, since this passed during the pandemic, over 10,000 women have had to be rushed to the hospital for medical care. You know, women, it's much easier to get the pills and then coerce women to take it. They're just not the medical checks. The people who are prescribing it on the other side of the Zoom conference call just, you know, can't really assess you as they can in hospital or in a GP surgery. So yeah. I feel like this is a massive decision and that women are being taken advantage of.
And just to give you the numbers, and this is just in, the numbers for this were 215 votes against 188. So I mean, as majorities in the House go, not gigantic. But look, I've got to ask you before we move on to another story. As an American living in the UK, and we think about what's happening in the States at the moment, in states like Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi as well, and the likelihood of the Supreme Court looking again at the key law on this and the precedent that it set. We are two countries on different trajectories, massively.
Yes and no. I mean, we're two countries in the throes of the culture war. The difference is that in America, we've made this a voting issue, whereas MPs over here can vote their conscience and they're not whipped. So it's become a political issue in the United States and a voting one. And that's why I think but it's also, we talk about it more in the US. And I think if it was talked about more and actually what women go through when it goes through an abortion and actually the development of the fetus and actually what happens in a procedure like that, I think people's minds would change.
Do you see any evidence that the mood is changing in the UK at all on this?
Slightly. I mean, it's not talked about enough, but the thing that does change it is technology. So the technology, when you know you're pregnant earlier, you see a heartbeat earlier, you know, and you can find out the sex of the baby much earlier. So through blood work now at 10 weeks. So I think the more technology advances and children can live outside of the womb at a much earlier stage, I think at like even 20 weeks, which is half of a pregnancy. You know, I just think that lives change that way and hearts change that way.
Okay. Sarah, I'm sure that's a story that's going to be reflected on through the course of the evening here on GB News, but for now, thanks for that. We're going to end on a lighter note. Kind of. For some people under the age of 25, indeed including at least one producer working here, the words fax machine mean absolutely nothing. But time was when they were the indispensable piece of office equipment. And yesterday, my guest on the show, Kathy Gingell, claimed that use of the fax machine was actually undergoing a revival, not just as a sort of nod to nostalgia, as we've seen with other resurgent technologies, things like vinyl records and Polaroid cameras, but because some people think they are better and more secure than modern alternatives. Let's Can't believe we just read that. Can that really be? Let's turn to the tech journalist. I wrote that, by the way. To the tech journalist, Will Guyatt, who joins us now. Will, welcome to you. With the fax machine.
If the fax machine is making a comeback, I will eat a hat live on GB News. It's not coming back. I have no idea where your previous guest got that idea from. That's not to say certain old technology comes back in. It's been the best year for selling cassettes for as long as we can remember, and also one of the greatest years for vinyl records. And one of the statistics is less than 50% of the vinyl records purchased are actually played. So there's some statistics about old technology coming back into use. Now, the fax machine was a great piece of technology for its time. It was effectively invented in the 1960s. There were previous versions before that, but the modern fax machine is around about the 1960s. And I am on a pretty much one-man tech journalist campaign to try and get the fax machine removed from anywhere where it's still being used. The NHS, Colin, the NHS, for example, I got told the other day the NHS were attempting to fax something from one hospital to another for my daughter. And then they said, oh, but they haven't got paper in the fax machine at the other end. Emails have existed for 25 years. You don't need to use a fax machine to send a message really easily and securely. They're great for sending sketched pictures to people, but if you've got 5 minutes to do that, just do it, scan it on your computer and send it over email if that's desperately something that you want to do. But no, thankfully, no return for the fax machine, but it was good for its time.
Well, I tell you what, Will, the context probably matters. This was in the context of a conversation Cathy and I were having about the BT plan to strip out or end the copper wire landline. And we discovered during the backwash from Storm Eunice that in certain parts of the country, especially rural areas, if people are only relying on digital, a landline that's provided digitally, when the power goes, the internet goes, and suddenly, and if you haven't got a mobile signal, you are marooned. And that really mattered for some people in more isolated areas. And the point that Cathy was making was, if you've got a fax, you can still, using the copper wire, you're about to tell me she was talking total rubbish, then it still works. That was her point. And there's some built-in resilience there by dint of its obsolescence.
Colin, I see that point. But if you're telling me people are going and getting the fax machine out of the cupboard, I consider myself fairly switched on as a 40-something-year-old bloke. I had to explain what a fax machine was to several colleagues in their 20s about 3 or 4 weeks ago, when we needed to try and find one in the business I work for, because we had to send something to an insurance company and they insisted having it by fax. But going back to your BT point about copper wire, and I know that's why I'm not why I'm here today, it's one of the stupidest decisions BT have ever made. They haven't communicated it correctly to people, and there's over 1 million elderly people without the internet who are genuinely terrified about losing their connection to people through the phone line. And the reality is fibre optic cable does not work as well, especially when there's a power cut. BT have had years to create a solution, and they've not bothered.
How did they get that so wrong, Will? I know it's a slightly different story, but, burglar alarms stop working, personal alarms that, you're old, you're frail, you fall over, you hit the person, they weren't working. I mean, how did they get such a massive corporate tech giant get things so wrong?
I think they assumed everybody was going to be happy switching over. I also thought they believed companies would create solutions for them. BT have now put a stop or a temporary hold on that and are looking at other solutions. But the reality remains is that mobile networks just simply aren't as reliable as what you had through the copper wires. When you have storms and sort of bad weather, you're going to find yourself in that situation again if you have a mobile network as the fallback to the solution. So I'm not sure how they're going to find their way out of this. They did offer me yesterday, after I'd complained about this repeatedly on the TV, a chance to find out more about their new digital services, and I might take their offer up in the next couple of days, but I don't see how they get out of this hole. I really don't.
Will Guyatt, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Sarah Elliott alongside me. I'm reminded a little bit of, maybe it's an urban myth, but I don't think it is. In the States, because of various freedom of information requests that were put in to government that required people to give up, this stuff, A4 paper. So people started taking confidential notes on Post-its because Post-its were not part of the remit of what a freedom of information request could make. My point is that sometimes, and I wonder whether, Will clearly knows his onions, but if you want something that's absolutely secure and you distrust maybe somebody snooping, is there a case at that point does the old-fashioned facts come in? I'm not being paid by the fax industry. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think the last time I used a fax was about 12 years ago. And then my U.S. bank, though, only communicates via fax on certain things. Really? Yes. It's actually caused massive headaches. So it is pretty unbelievable. But I think a lot, you asked what's wrong with BT, and I think a lot of times these corporates, they're just too bloated, they're too removed actually from the everyday person, and they make decisions because they think they either help their stock price or, help their legacy.
Yeah. It's funny. I always think when we talk about telecoms and the argument about nationalisation, privatisation, BT's always held up, isn't it, as an exemplar of why privatisation works.
Colin. It's like the NHS. Can't criticise.
Sarah, thanks very much for your company today, and maybe next time we'll have a go at the Trump voice.
One of us will have China.
That's it, China. Thanks very much indeed. You nearly got me doing it. Sarah, Elliott, thanks very much indeed. Thanks for watching today. Much more to come throughout the course of the evening. Jubes & Co is next, and we're going to bring you the weather forecast because in parts of the country today it's been pretty grim, especially in the north and Scotland, so look out now. Here's the weather.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Rain and snow is currently clearing south across the UK, followed by cold Arctic winds and the risk of icy patches first thing Thursday. This cold front is bringing a marked change with Arctic air following south and in some places temperatures dropping more than 10 Celsius compared with a few days ago. It's also bringing a mixture of rain and hill snow, with the snow increasingly coming to lower levels across southeast England as it clears during the early hours of Thursday. Don't be surprised in the southeast, particularly if you're somewhere like the Chilterns or the Downs, to wake up to a slushy covering of snow. Won't last long though, and in the north we've already seen some snow and it will continue through the night with some icy patches first thing. A widespread frost to begin the day, temperatures well below freezing for some clearer and more sheltered parts of northern UK, and actually plenty of bright weather first thing once any remaining persistent rain and snow clears away from the far southeast. There'll be further wintry showers, sleet, snow, hail into the east of England, northern and eastern Scotland on a biting northeasterly wind, and it's going to feel cold in that wind, temperatures at best 6 to 8 Celsius fairly widely. But there'll also be sunny spells away from the showers, particularly in the west. And a heads up, with clearing skies on Thursday evening, a really good chance actually of seeing the aurora, especially if you live in the north. But it's going to be a freezing night under those clear skies. Still some wintry showers into the east first thing Friday.